At 0600 hours local time, the USS Decatur, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, maintained her patrol pattern in the Persian Gulf, cruising at 12 knots through waters that had become as predictable as they were contested. The ship's combat information center hummed with the steady rhythm of peacetime operations. One could call the Persian Gulf peaceful. 23 years of continuous American naval presence had established a rhythm to these waters, an unspoken understanding between navies that operated here. But understanding required both sides to speak the same language of respect and restraint. On this particular morning in February 2026, someone in Tehran had decided the conversation needed to change. The Decatur's commanding officer, Captain James Harrison, sat in his sea cabin reviewing overnight intelligence summaries when his tactical action officer, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, appeared at the door. Her expression told him immediately that routine had just ended. "Sir, we're getting reports of an Iranian Revolutionary Guard Navy fast attack craft departing Bandar Abbas. Multiple contacts, moving southeast at 28 knots. Track 1 is a Boghammmar-class patrol boat. They're heading toward our position." Harrison set down his coffee, the casual morning dissolving into professional focus. "Distance?" he asked, already moving toward the Combat Information Center. 90 nautical miles and closing. ETA to our current position. Approximately 2 hours 40 minutes at their current speed and course. The captain nodded, a gesture that contained no surprise. This was the Persian Gulf. Iranian fast attack craft probed American positions with the regularity of tides. What made this morning different wasn't immediately apparent, but Harrison had learned over 3 trades in the Navy. The details revealed themselves in time. The Decatur's crew, of around 300 sailors, came from 48 different states. They represented the diversity of modern America, bound together by training and the weight of responsibility that came with operating a $5 billion warship in the world's most volatile waterway. Most were in their 20s, having joined the Navy seeking opportunity, escape, or purpose. They were mechanics and electricians, engineers and sailors, officers and enlisted personnel who trained relentlessly for scenarios they hoped would never occur but understood they might need to execute in seconds. The ship's systems had been stress-tested in the Red Sea, where Houthi militants had launched hundreds of attacks over the preceding 18 months. Every major system had proven itself in combat conditions. Every crew member understood exactly what their role entailed when chaos arrived without warning. By 0630 hours, the Iranian contacts had accelerated to 32 knots. The tactical picture updated continuously on the Decatur's displays. The spy radar array, with its 4 massive octagonal phase mounted on the superstructure, painted the approaching vessels with mechanical indifference. Each of the 4 faces contained 4,350 individual radiating elements capable of electronically steering their beams across the entire hemisphere. No moving parts meant no scanning delays. Targets appeared, were acquired, tracked, and continuously updated in the milliseconds between pulses. The system simultaneously tracked the Iranian patrol boats, 3 civilian merchant vessels, 2 fishing dhows, and a Turkish container ship spread across a 200 nautical mile radius. Against this complex picture, the Decatur's fire control systems maintained continuous calculations on the Iranian contacts: position, velocity, heading, predicted maneuvers, weapons employment ranges, defensive countermeasures. 4 UAK-43 processors handled the computational burden, while the tactical action officer reviewed threat assessments. What made this morning different became apparent 645 hours when the Iranian patrol boats altered their course toward the Decatur rather than paralleling at the standard distance of 5 to 7 nautical miles. The commanding officer of the IRGN Boghammmar, a vessel measuring barely 85 feet in length, had received orders from Tehran that morning. The nature of those orders would later become a subject of international scrutiny and debate. What was clear in the moment was that the rules of engagement that had governed Persian Gulf operations for more than 2 decades were about to be tested by a crew that either didn't understand them or had been instructed to ignore them entirely. At 0700 hours, the Iranian patrol boat closed to 60 nautical miles, still too distant for conventional visual identification, but well within the Decatur's sensor envelope. The spy radar measured the vessel's displacement at roughly 90 tons, speed now maintaining at 35 knots, heading steady toward intercept. The threat library loaded the standard profile for Boghammmar-class patrol boats. Maximum armament typically included 2 20mm cannon mounted forward, possible tiny TIM anti-ship missiles in portable mounts on the aft section, and certainly small arms carried by the crew of around 20 personnel. Against the Decatur's layered defensive architecture, a Boghammmar represented a manageable threat if it acted rationally within established parameters. If it did not, the mathematics became significantly more complicated, though still vastly favoring the American destroyer. The Decatur's electronic warfare team began passive monitoring of the Iranian vessel's radar emissions. What they found was interesting and troubling in equal measure. The Boghammar's navigation radar operated continuously, painting the Decatur without attempting stealth. But alongside that standard emissions pattern, the Iranians were radiating acquisition radar, the type normally associated with weapons targeting. The electronic warfare officers reported this finding to Captain Harrison immediately. "They're lighting us up with fire control radar," Lieutenant Commander Chen reported, her voice steady but carrying an edge. "No active targeting lock yet, but they're in the process of acquiring. Recommend we illuminate them in return, just to make our position clear regarding their intentions." Harrison nodded. "Do it, and get me a direct line to Fifth Fleet. They need to know this is no longer a routine approach." The Decatur's spy radar shifted into active targeting mode, its beams concentrating on the Iranian patrol boat with intensity. In the language of electronic emissions, this was a clear message. "We see you. We are watching your every movement. We are ready to respond to aggression with overwhelming force." The message was understood immediately in the Combat Information Center aboard the Iranian vessel. What the crew of that small patrol boat did next revealed the true nature of their mission and the desperation driving Iranian strategy in early 2026. At 07:15 hours, with the Iranian boat nautical miles from the Decatur and stellar rating, the patrol boat's electronic emissions suddenly shifted. The acquisition radar cut off abruptly. The navigation radar powered down. For approximately 8 seconds, the Iranian vessel went completely dark, radiating nothing, transmitting no electronic signature whatsoever. The Decatur's tactical team recognized this immediately. Electronic silence at this range, one thing. The Iranian crew was preparing for maneuvers that they did not want the Americans to predict in advance. They had made their decision. What came next would determine the trajectory of Iranian and American naval relations for years to come. The Iranian Boghammmar altered course at 07:17 hours, turning directly toward the Decatur's current position. The vessel's speed remained at 35 knots, but now the closure rate accelerated dramatically. The geometry that had previously suggested a parallel transit now indicated direct approach. The Decatur's combat systems updated their calculations. Closest point of approach would occur in approximately 18 minutes if neither vessel altered course. Current range, 35 nautical miles. Collision range, 1 nautical mile. Between those 2 points lay every option available to both commanding officers. Captain Harrison had decades of experience, but the magnitude of what he was witnessing required him to process the decision calculus carefully. An Iranian patrol boat, barely 1/50th the displacement of the Decatur, armed with weapons that posed minimal threat to a modern American destroyer, was deliberately closing for what appeared to be either a collision course or some form of aggressive display. The political implications were immediate and staggering. A collision between an American destroyer and an Iranian Revolutionary Guard patrol boat would trigger international incidents that would ripple across global markets, diplomatic channels, and military preparations worldwide. The Decatur's crew of 300 American sailors, the Iranian crew of approximately 20, the broader strategic implications for American presence in the Persian Gulf, and the question of whether this represented a deliberate act of war or a catastrophic miscalculation all converged on the decisions Harrison would make in the next 10 minutes. "Sound general quarters," Harrison ordered. The alarm that followed was not the drill alarm the crew heard regularly during training exercises. This was the real thing. Throughout the Decatur, sailors moved to their stations with practiced efficiency. The ship's defensive posture shifted immediately. Anti-ship missile defense systems came to full readiness. Close-in weapon systems powered up and trained toward the approaching Iranian vessel. The Combat Information Center shifted from monitoring to active engagement protocols. Each system operator understood they were no longer preparing for potential combat. They were now preparing to defend the ship at an actively approaching threat. The Iranian patrol boat had closed to 25 nautical miles by 07:25 hours. The visual signatures of the vessel became apparent on the Decatur's optical sensors. American sailors could see the Iranian flag, could identify individual personnel on deck, could confirm the presence of weapon systems on the vessel's superstructure. The Iranian crew could certainly see the American destroyer. They would have understood the magnitude of the ship they were approaching. A destroyer displacing 8,000 tons, carrying 96 cells of advanced missiles, equipped with sensor systems that could track targets beyond the horizon, staffed by a crew trained to execute coordinated defensive operations against simultaneous threats. The small patrol boat approaching at 35 knots carried fewer weapons than the Decatur carried defensive countermeasures. At 07:30 hours, the Iranian boat closed to 18 nautical miles. Captain Harrison made the decision to attempt communication before escalation became irreversible. "Put them on the emergency frequency," he instructed. "All channels. Let them know that they are approaching an American naval vessel and that they need to alter immediately or face defensive action." The radio operator transmitted the warning in English, then in Farsi, then in English again. The message was unambiguous. Change course. Reduce speed. Do not approach further. The response from from the Iranian patrol boat came 30 seconds later in heavily accented English. USS Decatur, you are in Iranian territorial waters. We are conducting a lawful bullboarding operation. Cut your engines and prepare to be inspected. The absurdity of this claim was so profound that it bordered on dangerous. The Decatur was operating in international waters, in the Persian Gulf, under the framework of freedom of navigations that the United States Navy had conducted continuously since 1983. The water depths and proximity to designated shipping lanes made the location unambiguously international. Iranian claims of territorial waters extended to 12 nautical miles from their baseline. The Decatur was operating at 37 nautical miles from the Iranian coast, well beyond any reasonable interpretation of Iranian sovereignty. Moreover, a boarding operation against a United States Navy destroyer was not a lawful action under any interpretation of international maritime law. It was, in fact, precisely the type of act that could constitute armed aggression. Captain Harrison understood immediately that communication was not going to resolve this situation. The Iranian patrol boat commander had received orders to execute this action, and those orders apparently did not include provisions for rational dialogue with the American destroyer. The geometry of the encounter was now critical. The Iranian boat was at 15 nautical miles and closing at 35 knots. At that closure rate, they would reach the Decatur's position in approximately 26 minutes if both vessels maintained current course and speed. At 12 nautical miles, the threat envelope shifted significantly. The Iranian patrol boat's weapon systems, while limited, could engage the destroyer at those ranges with their tiny TIM anti-ship missiles, though such weapons posed manageable threats given the Decatur's defensive architecture. What made this scenario uniquely dangerous was not the Iranian patrol boat itself, but the strategic calculation behind it. Iranian military leadership in early 2026 was operating under a set of assumptions about American naval response to provocations in the Persian Gulf. Those assumptions had been shaped by years of American restraint, by American focus on other theaters, and by the political costs of escalation in American domestic politics. The Iranian calculation appeared to be that the United States, facing political constraints and costs of combat operations, might choose to back down rather than sink an Iranian patrol boat. The American calculation, at least as understood by Captain Harrison and the Decatur's crew, was precisely the opposite. American credibility, American willingness to enforce the rules of the sea, and American resolve in defense of its naval vessels were not negotiable commodities. They were the foundation upon which American maritime dominance rested. By 0744 hours, the Iranian patrol boat had closed to nautical miles. Captain Harrison made the decision that would define this encounter. Load the Mark 46 with armor-piercing rounds, he ordered. Gun captain, I want rounds on target within 30 seconds of my command. Do not fire without my explicit order, but be ready to execute immediately upon my command. The Mark 45 gun crew, the same crew that had trained relentlessly in the Red Sea, understood exactly what they were being asked to prepare for. They loaded the 5-inch gun with high-explosive armor-piercing rounds designed to penetrate the hulls of fast attack craft. The Mark V velocimeter measured the muzzle velocity of each round as it left the barrel. The Mk-160 gun computer system calculated Balik solutions accounting for target motion, wind, barrel wear, and a dozen other variables. The system was ready to execute with lethal precision. The Iranian patrol boat transmitted another warning at 7445 hours. USS Decatur, this is a final warning. Cut your engines and prepare for boarding. Failure to comply will result in military action. The threat was transparent and meaningless. The patrol boat carried no weapons systems capable of meaningfully engaging the destroyer. Its maximum speed, while impressive for a craft of its size, was insufficient to escape a destroyer traveling at 25 knots. The crew facing the American destroyer numbered roughly 20 individuals, each of whom almost certainly understood that they were approaching a threshold from which retreat would be the only rational choice. Yet retreat did not appear to be an option the Iranian command structure had authorized. At 0750 hours, the Iranian patrol boat closed to 8 nautical miles. At this distance, the Decatur's close-in weapon systems, the Phalanx CAWS, came into active targeting mode. The system tracked the approaching Iranian vessel continuously, calculating intercept solutions should defensive fire become necessary. The psychological weight of this moment cannot be underestimated. The Iranian crew, observing the American destroyer's weapons systems tracking their vessel, facing electronically generated threat signatures that indicated they were painted by multiple targeting radars, understood that they were no longer conducting a routine approach. They were minutes away from potential violent engagement with one of the most powerful warships in the world. The Iranian patrol boat commander made a final transmission at 0752 hours. Decatur, this is your final warning. We are executing a lawful boarding operation in Iranian territorial waters. Submit to inspection or face face the consequences. The transmission was made in English, Spanish, and Farsi, suggesting that the Iranian military had prepared this message in advance, that this encounter was no spontaneous provocation, but rather a deliberate action ordered from Tehran. Captain Harrison's response was measured, professional, and absolute. Iranian patrol craft, you are operating in international waters. You are approaching an armed American naval vessel in a manner consistent with hostile intent. Alter your course immediately to 090. Reduce speed to 5 knots. Do not approach further or you will be engaged with naval gunfire. The Iranian patrol boat did not alter course. Instead, at 7755 hours, the vessel accelerated to 38 knots and maintained its direct approach vector. The geometry now became critical. 8 nautical miles remained between the vessels. At a combined closure speed of approximately 50 knots, approximately 9.5 minutes separated the current moment from the point where the Iranian boat would be in the Decatur's engagement envelope for the Mark 45 gun. The weapon system was ready. The fire control solution was continuously updating. The crew was at their stations, hands poised on the firing mechanisms, awaiting Captain Harrison's command. What happened in the final minutes before engagement illustrated the profound difference between American naval doctrine validated across decades of combat operation and Iranian military strategy, which appeared to rest on assumptions about American restraint that were about to prove tragically incorrect. The Iranian patrol boat's commander appeared to believe that the American destroyer would not actually fire on his vessel, that the warnings and the targeting and the weapons preparation were all part of a negotiation process, a form of maritime brinkmanship in which the side demonstrating greater willingness to escalate would ultimately prevail. At 0758 hours, with the Iranian patrol boat at 5 nautical miles and closing, Captain Harrison made the decision that with the trajectory of Iranian-American relations and serve as a stark reminder to every military strategist in the world about the consequences of miscalculating American resolve. Fire a warning shot, he ordered. 45.5 gun, 5-inch round, fire across the bow of the approaching vessel, 500 yards ahead of their track. The gun captain acknowledged the order immediately. The Mark 45 rotated slightly on its mount, adjusted for the target's motion and the round's ballistic properties, and fired a single round that sent a 5-inch projectile traveling at 1,650 feet per second across the bow of the approaching Iranian patrol boat. The impact of that single warning shot on the psychology of the Iranian crew cannot be overstated. The physical reality of an American naval destroyer firing weaponry at their position served as a brutal clarification of the situation they had placed themselves in. This was no longer a test of resolve or a game of maritime poker. This was the moment when abstract warnings became concrete reality. The round landed in the water approximately 400 yards ahead of the Iranian patrol boat, exactly where the fire system calculated it should. The explosion sent a column of water skyward, a visible manifestation of the precision and lethality available to the American destroyer. The Iranian patrol boat's response came immediately. The vessel began to turn, altering its course away from the Decatur, reducing its speed dramatically. The acceleration that had characterized their approach now reversed. The crew, having received the message that American warnings were not abstract threats, but actual indications of what would follow, chose the rational path. They would return to base. They would report failure to complete their mission. They would face whatever consequences Tehran imposed for that failure. Those consequences, they apparently calculated, were preferable to the alternative. By 0805 hours, the Iranian patrol boat had reduced speed to 10 knots and was maintaining a course that paralleled the Decatur rather than approaching it. The threat envelope had collapsed. The vessel was moving away from the destroyer, increasing distance with each passing minute. The Decatur's weapons systems remained at elevated readiness, but the critical moment had passed. The Iranian commanding officer had blinked. He had tested American resolve and found it absolute. What had occurred in the preceding hour represented a microcosm of the broader strategic competition that had intensified in the Persian Gulf. By 2026, Iranian military leaders had calculated, apparently based on perceived American restraint in other theaters and political constraints on American escalation, that they could conduct increasingly aggressive maneuvers with relative impunity. What they had not anticipated was the fundamental clarity of Captain James Harrison's understanding of American naval power. The Decatur was not a diplomatic instrument. It was not a platform for negotiations or compromise. It was an American warship operating in international waters, and the rules governing encounters in those waters were not negotiable. The Iranian patrol boat maintained its withdrawal, increasing distance steadily the next hour. By 0900 hours, the vessel had turned back toward Bandar Abbas and had increased, apparently rushing to return to base before American naval air assets could be brought into play. The Decatur maintained its patrol pattern, its crew remaining at elevated readiness until the Iranian vessel had withdrawn beyond missile range. By 1000 hours, the the Iranian boat was at 30 nautical miles and had resumed its transit back toward the Iranian coast. Within 4 hours, the encounter had become public knowledge. The HMCS Montreal, a Canadian frigate operating in conjunction with the Decatur, had captured video footage of the warning shot. That footage circled the globe on news networks within 6 hours. Iranian state media initially claimed that American forces had attempted to ram the patrol boat, a claim so divorced from reality that it received little international credence. Within 36 hours, international maritime organizations and naval analysts had reviewed the available footage and evidence and concluded that the Decatur had acted with restraint, that the warning shots had been justified, and that Iranian command had deliberately ordered an aggressive approach that violated international maritime law. The diplomatic aftermath proved more complex than the military encounter itself. The Iranian government demanded an apology and compensation. The United States dismissed the demand and instead filed formal protests with the international organization regarding Iranian violations of the Convention on the International Regulations for Preventing Collisions at Sea. American naval planners immediately increased American destroyer presence in the Persian Gulf, deploying additional Arleigh Burke-class vessels to ensure continuous operations. The message was clear. American naval dominance would not be tested again without understanding the consequences. What became apparent in the months that followed was that the February 2026 encounter between the USS Decatur and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard patrol boat represented not a unique incident, but rather a new baseline for Iranian provocation. The Iranian command structure, apparently having determined that American resolve could be challenged through asymmetric provocations, began orchestrating increasingly aggressive approaches by their fast attack craft. Each encounter followed the same pattern: Iranian patrol boats accelerating toward American destroyers, claiming territorial waters that did not exist under international law, threatening actions that violated maritime conventions, and ultimately withdrawing when faced with the unmistakable reality of American firepower. By the end of 2026, the Decatur and her sister ships had executed more than 40 warning shots against Iranian patrol boats. Not a single shot had actually struck a vessel. The precision of American fire control systems, the accuracy of calculations that accounted for every variable, the technological superiority that flowed from decades of actual combat experience at sea and elsewhere, all of these factors ensured that warnings were unmistakable, but restraint was also evident. The message transmitted through each warning shot was identical: we can destroy you, we are choosing not to. Change course. The Iranian pattern of provocation eventually evolved beyond simple aggressive approaches. By late 2026, Iranian Revolutionary Guard commanders began experimenting with different tactics. They sent swarms of small naval drones, each carrying explosives, toward American ships. The Decatur's phalanx seized the U.S. destroyers one after another, with bursts of 20mm cannon fire. They attempted electronic warfare attack, radiating the American destroyer with signals designed to confuse or jam her sensors. The electronic warfare team aboard the Decatur identified and defeated every attack, often radiating the Iranian emitters in return, demonstrating that American sensors had penetrated Iranian electronic warfare capabilities in seconds. What never changed across all of these encounters and provocations was the fundamental asymmetry. The Decatur and her sister destroyers represented the peak of American naval engineering and operational doctrine. They embodied decades of actual combat experience, continuous feedback loops that incorporated lessons from every engagement, and technological sophistication that had no peer in the world. The Iranian patrol boats, fast attack craft, electronic warfare systems, and tactical approaches represented admirable ingenuity within severe resource constraints. But ingenuity and determination, however impressive, could not overcome the gulf that separated test-range statistics from combat-proven systems. The incident of February 2026 became a defining moment in Persian Gulf naval operations. It established a new baseline for American naval response to Iranian provocation. It demonstrated to every military strategist in the world that American naval dominance was not merely a function of technology, but rather a product of the integration of advanced systems with doctrine refined through actual combat experience, with command structures trained to execute decisive action, and with a national commitment to enforcing the rules that governed international maritime law. The crew of the USS Decatur, having executed their responsibilities with professionalism and restraint, completed their patrol and eventually returned to home port. The Iranian crew that had piloted the patrol boat that had approached an American destroyer at high speed, threatening boarding and inspection of a $5 billion warship, returned to Bandar Abbas and faded from public attention. But the strategic message they had transmitted remained vivid. Iranian military leadership, they could challenge American naval dominance in the Persian Gulf. What they had learned through the subsequent encounters was that belief, however sincerely held, could not overcome the physics and the doctrine and technological superiority that defined American naval power in the world's most contested waterways.